Hey. This is Dragon, Pete's writer from Macedonia. I would like to introduce today's guest for this episode. Mr. Jack Devine is the author of the new book SPYMASTER'S PRISM, The Fight Against Russian Aggression. I had to do this. Devine is a seasoned CIA professional who served more than 3 decades, some at the highest level of the agency. Much is happening in the news cycle on the domestic side of the US affairs, but according to Devine, Russia remains a constant national security threat. He uses his gimlet-eyed view to talk us through the fascinating spy cases and covert action activities of Russia, not only through the Cold War past, but up to and including the interference in the Trump era. Devine also looks over the horizon to see what lies ahead in the struggle and provides prescriptions for the future. I would kindly ask you to support the Break It Down show by doing a monthly subscription because that helps us a lot and helps the show grow. Also, I would invite you to support Save the Brave as we battle PTSD. Without further ado, today's guest, Jack Devine.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick
This
Morata.
is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Jack Devine, Breaking Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
That's right. Jack Devine is on the Break It Down show with me, and Jack has a fantastic new book, and we're going to discuss that. I suppose, Jack, let's first reveal. So you and I are both we both work in the spy world. We're both espionage experts, and you have written a book called SPYMASTER'S PRISM. And right when I first started reading it, like the first things, like the first few sentences of your acknowledgement section and your foreword and all that stuff, you talk about, you define terms, and I think you and I could spend a good bit of time just defining terms, because when you talk about, especially with espionage in general as a whole, right? Like you say, a spy master is not a spy, but I would say in my case, they are. I mean, I'm out running sources, and if I'm in town as a combat spy, as a guy who's working with the Army and the DoD, and I get caught, you know what they're going to call me? They're not going to call me a spy master. I mean, they might call me a spy master, but they think
Did they call you deceased?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And that's like the third sentence in your thing too, about how dangerous it is. And then the other thing is I think intelligence is a hard concept for a lot of folks to grasp. I know you'll get this. And again, you define this right away in your book, but my job is to give the commander things that they don't know that are keeping them from winning, or present danger or harm. We often just focus on the danger and harm side, and we miss the opportunity side. At least in my business, on my side of it. I'm sure that you've got different goals, but let's talk a little bit about what intelligence is. Let's talk a little bit about the danger that goes into that. And then what is a spy master and what is a spy? Let's just get into some of these terms.
Okay, that's a good way to start. So let's take the word intelligence. Since the beginning of time, people have used intelligence to figure things out. Often it's the plans and intentions. Someone was quoting yesterday one of the Chinese military philosophers saying, you can spend an awful lot of time and money on military preparedness and not know what the intentions and plans are. Therefore, you need spies. And this is going back a couple thousand years. The interesting thing about America is, Washington used it. Lincoln used information. It's finding out what the other side has up its sleeves. Roosevelt used it, but every time after war left, Americans walked away from the intelligence business because they don't like the idea of secrets, something not out in the public domain. It's contrary to sort of the makeup of Congress and so on. But circumstances being what they are, we get back into the business. And the CIA was actually created after World War II, after the OSS, the famous swashbuckling group on World War II, you see a lot of movies about. It was disbanded and then rejoined into the CIA. And when you look at intelligence, it's very interesting. The founding fathers of CIA looked at it with 4 categories. One was intelligence, information and analysis, collecting everything you can, analyzing it. And then you had a group that was administrative, make sure everybody got paid, including your agents. Then you had a technical directorate. And that was in the old days, to put taps on people, and communications and clandestine communication was always part of it. And then it's the director I was in. And we always used elegant words, never spying. At the beginning, it was called the Directorate of Plans. Then it became the Directorate of Operations during my time. And now they call it the National Center of Clandestine Service, which is a little more specific. I'd go back to plans if I could. So you don't know what it stands for. But that's where the intelligence, the spy business is. Now, what I think will shock your audience is nobody inside those hallowed halls of CIA ever used the word spy. They don't refer to themselves as spies. They don't refer to the people that are working in foreign governments on their behalf as spies. They're called agents, and the CIA people are called operators, right? So we have these elegant terms. But you go out in the outside world, and this is what you're really referring to, Pete. And that is, you start talking, you need language that people understand. So instead of agents, they're spies. Now, a spy master is the person that's in charge of all the spies. In other words, you manage the spies. And then CIA is layered. At the first level, the station has spies, and then the division has spies. And then you get to the very top of the agents, the operational director, the job I had at one point in time. And that's where you manage managers that manage spies. And the importance of that is calibrating the key issue that you talk about, risks and gains, making sure tradecraft. I'm not a plumber, my dad was, but trade is knowing how to do things and working at the knee of a journeyman and all that. Well, the spy business is very much like that. And I also use the word, when you use covert action, which I will find in a second, I always say you need to put the plumbing in, which needs your preparation. So in the spy business, there's actually three major divisions. One is counterintelligence, the part that you're heavily involved in, Pete, and that's, where are the spies inside our system? How do we defend ourselves? And then you have the offensive side, collecting and recruiting spies, and that's called foreign intelligence. But the other part, and it's the part that's most controversial, the part that most people think of when they think of CIA, and that's covert action. Bay of Pigs, or the effort that I was involved in, it's written some length in the book, driving the Russians out of Afghanistan in the late 80s. So that's your covert action part. And it's a tricky part. It's the part that's controversial, and you get hearings downtown and newspaper flaps. And most people in CIA would rather just do collection. They don't want anything to do with covert action. But I will tell you the secret. Here's the secret. When you sit down at Pennsylvania Avenue, they want to know, what can you do to fix a problem? So it's not just, hey, thank you for telling me the world's falling apart. What are you going to do? How are you going to help me? And part of that is also working with foreign governments. And that's where we had a huge advantage over the Russians, in that most of the world, neutral and free, had collaborative relationships. So it was a force multiplier for us. And that still continues today. So I think that's some of the terminologies. And what I'm saying is, as a person who spent a lot of time in the business, running stations around the world, running divisions, that I have a way of looking at things. And I'm a spy master, and the prism is that unique way that you look at things. I have one chapter, if I could just, but anytime you want, you'd have at it. But there's a chapter called The Spy Master President. And there's a quote right underneath it. It says, there's no such thing as an ex-KGB officer, Vladimir Putin. So that's how he framed himself as a spy master. I think when we look at Russia today and its strategy and its plans, I think he's effective on some level, but his strategy is strictly a Cold War strategy, and it ought to be recognized as such. I would say, Jack Devine would say, there's no such thing as an ex-CIA officer. That doesn't mean I'm on their payroll or anyone that's on their payroll, but it's a way of thinking through those years of experience about the hard realities and nonpartisan objectivity that is the core of a spy master. You really become a tough-edged realist. And I think that's what a spy master is. And so I'm trying to look at the world through that lens. And, if you're an academic, you look at it one way, for a politician, another. So I'm trying to address the Russians and what they're up to today through a current day prism.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And this is one of the reasons why terms are so important in our field, because you say a lot of words, like you said, counterintelligence and collection and operations, and and intelligence is all of these things, and they overlap. I was trying to draw a Venn diagram the other day of what intelligence looks like, as I try to write my own stuff. And you quickly realize you can't Venn it. It's got to be an Euler diagram with all of these things, because counterintelligence can be defensive, but it can be offensive too. And you can counter the counterintelligence. And I mean, oh my gosh, right? We can go on forever with these things. And so I guess the biggest thing I think I would want to convey to the audience is I agree with everything you're saying. And we can get into the nitty and gritty and granular detail. But the point is we're trying to find opportunities, trying to find things that we don't know that we should know, whether they improve our position, degrade our enemy's position, or just help us negotiate better with our friends. I mean, there's this, everybody collects on everybody. I use the word spy because it's just a fact. And I look at everybody else's point of view of me. But as you know, in the community, when we use this word spy, especially in, about ourselves, it's really tough for my peers. Like, they don't take me seriously sometimes. I'm like, well, I've done it. I've been out in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've walked into villages, and it's me and I'm spying. There's just no way around it, because I don't determine that, and I'm doing it in a way that's innocuous. I'm good at what I do and I've mastered the craft. But when we look at that, I feel that if we lose sight of how the other side perceives us, then we are blind to a lot of what we need to know. What do you think about that?
I think that's a major part of intelligence analysis, and that is, how is the other side perceiving you, not how you perceive yourself, because actions against you are going to be derived by that. Now, there's also disinformation, right, which we're rich in our history. The Russians have spent generations working on it, and that is how you make the other side misunderstand what you're doing on a particular occasion. However, one of the core parts is to make sure you really don't over or underestimate a threat, and therefore you really need to put yourself in the position of the other person. I can give you an example on this, which I found interesting during the time I ran the program in Afghanistan, as I mentioned. During my time, the Stinger missile went in, and for those that aren't tuned to this, it was a defining weapon. It changed the course of the history, because the Russians' helicopters had to fly above the range of the missile, and therefore all the weapons could move across the border and all the supply train. We were nailed down. So, there was resistance in the U.S. policy circles to put it in, because they thought it would start World War III. And I was with the other school thinking, look, the Russians know what we're doing. They put stuff in. We put stuff in. It's part of the game. And when it went in, we didn't get it to march. We didn't get a single word. But somewhere along the way, it wasn't one of our operations, a group of mujahideen drove into Uzbekistan with truckloads of the Quran religious book, and they were distributing them. And the Russians went crazy, not over the Stinger, not over the battlefield. So what happened is they were concerned that we were politically interfering inside, and we were going to stir up the Muslim world. So from the perception point of view, we had no idea of that sensitivity or the depth of that sensitivity. And suppose Jack Devine thought, hey, that's a good idea. Why don't you do that? Then you would be going toe to toe with them and not even realizing. So this goes to your fundamental point, but you need to get in the other person's shoes, be able to appreciate what a threat is and isn't from their perspective, so it's not miscalculated. That's why I also believe in sub rosa discussions between intelligence services.
Yeah. Some
things you can't discuss, like cyber. You can't have a conference on cyber. What are people going to say at the conference? Oh, yeah, we're all doing cyber, so let's agree not to do it. I mean, what a waste of time. So they're not going to say that, and two, they're not going to agree to it. So a number of things need to be done in that world. And I just wanted to add one thing that I should have mentioned. The last director, the CIA was created in 1947. The Science and Technology Director was formed in 1962, if I remember. There wasn't another one until 2015, and that was a Digital Intelligence Director. And I think what that highlights is this whole world of cyber and how important it is. And I would say it's the fundamental change in the intelligence business from when I was a young guy going in. And today, when I look at it, not only from my experience of many years, over 30 years in there, but outside, I've continued to pay close attention, as you have, to movements, trends in the intelligence world. And we're in the Wild West in the cyber world. We really don't have ground rules. And I think that's the fundamental thesis of this book. The Russians are interfering in our political affairs. And that was not true in the Cold War. And let me catch your breath. But there's two things I would say is I should talk about those rules a little bit. And the other thing is, why am I focusing on Russia when the Chinese are very robust in this cyber world? So, but I don't want to ramble. But there are two things that somewhere in the course of this discussion, I would like to tease out a little bit.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to tease out because we're talking about complex things. I want to stick on the perspective thing for a moment because you're right. When you start to realize what it means for China to have an exploding middle class that's greater than the entire population of the United States, they need energy. They demand products. And if you're going to have stability, they've got to deal with that. So we can try to keep them in a box and keep them in the China that we knew 50 years ago, but that's just not a reality. And then you look at of course, the Bosphorus, or look at Iran, right? Like Iran is surrounded by us. Of course, they're going to be. I mean, we struggle with Mexico and our border there, and it causes us a lot of internal consternation and problems and discord. Now, imagine what that's like for Iran or for Russia. And I don't want to feel too empathetic about them, but I have to understand that these are strategic, important things for them. And then on the ground, you have the tactical and the ground truth level realities that you have to be able to spin the camera around and see. So this isn't just, and I know I'm not explaining this to you, but this is for the audience. So you have to understand that there's all these layers of perspective that you have to consider, and how they're acting is their cultural norm because of where they're at. And I would say, as a person who runs sources and gathers information, all those things, the more I can use their system of knowledge and work within their paradigm, the more successful I'll be, the more information I'll get for the command and get them to focus on the things. Because look, an infantry commander, they're brilliant, they're highly trained, they're highly educated, but they think in one direction. How do I close with and destroy the enemy? And oftentimes that's not the dance that you need to do, because the Taliban aren't going to show up for that fight. Why would they, right? So Pete, how do we deal with this? And that's why you send a guy like me or a guy like Jack out to do what we do and gather this information, because we can spin the camera around and look at ourselves and our operation from their point of view.
So I think that point about perspective is a key one. Although I must put a marker down. I am not empathetic about Russia or Iran on any issue. Okay, my record won't allow me to go there. But knowing what they think about what's happening to them and their perception. In fact, this is a big problem with Russia, because I don't think they have in perspective exactly. They're using the Cold War concept that we're an implacable enemy, and I don't think that's the way it should be. We should reset. But what I wanted to say earlier about why did they write a book about Russia instead of one about China? Well, everybody's writing one about China, right? And but China is our biggest geopolitical, military, economic challenge, and they're coming at it from a potential area for conflict. So that's number one. But the book, this is where people get confused, because it's such a partisan world. One group wants to talk only about Russia, the other one about China. So when you say, Russia, you must be on the other side. No, what I really want to say to the listeners is the reason we have to be careful we don't misunderstand how important Russia's intervention in the United States is. During the Cold War, we had an understanding. It was like the Moscow rules. You're not going to find it written anywhere. Most people don't know about it. Most people don't even understand it. But there was an understanding that we weren't going to counterfeit money during the Cold War, because we would mutually destroy the world. It was as deadly as a nuclear weapon in the sense of economic impact. We weren't going to rough up each other's officers, right? Now, there are some exceptions, but by and large, the history was void of that. But the other thing that I think people don't really grasp is that, with very few exceptions, the United States never interfered inside Russia in its political dynamic. And they did not interfere in ours. We went toe to toe, Afghanistan, Chile, Cuba, Iran, I mean, over and over again. But inside, we did. That's why the 2016, it's not about the election at the end of the day. They went in with their own strategy. It's called the hybrid strategy of using propaganda and cyber to weaken your enemy. And we're in the enemy category. It might be too hard enemy, but we're certainly an adversary. Okay. So the point that I'm making is the Chinese collect a lot of information. They are working in the cyberspace, but they are restrained on political activism in the United States. And they are behind the Russians in running intelligence operations in the human world. But you can see, because there's examples day in and day out where the Chinese are showing their head above water, and that as that country gets stronger, they're going to get more and more invested in human operations. So from that spy master's perspective of looking at the threat and the cyber threat, as you said, offense and defense, the counterintelligence, the Russians, it really wasn't about personality. It was to keep us off bounds politically. And if you look at it, I don't believe Putin for a minute knew what was going to happen when he intervened. He just thought it would be a good way to cause political unrest. But we went through two impeachments. Congress barely speak to each other across the aisle. In my day, there was a lot of cooperation down the hill. So you would go back and say, wait a minute, off of that operation, you ended up accomplishing their objective. And we're missing the point of where the success was there. It wasn't whether they recruited some junior level person of the Trump team. It was really this, and it continues. That's what people aren't paying attention to. And they've even been aggressive in, attacking State Department, DHS. You had an attack just a few months ago. And that's still within the realm of cyber attacks that countries, the ability to go in there. The use of it is where there are no rules. Everybody knows the game on the collection side. There's no rules on when you use it. But they've broken the rules, and they're going to continue. And I don't see a policy emerging. I don't think we've made a decision. I mean, how long do you sit still and let this go on? And I'm suggesting diplomacy and discussions to work it out. But if it doesn't, then I think we have to look back. And if you don't counter in kind, don't fire tomahawk across the desert. Somehow that scares people into going to the table. That won't work.
Yeah, it's a complex world, and you and I both know that the odds are greater than zero. That someone in Russia said, "Look, the American media is gullible, and they will chase money over facts. And if we can get them to go along with us, we can get the Americans to tear themselves apart, and at least not get far ahead of us, or whatever. Right? Maybe even bring it back to the pack, and at best destabilize, so we can gain some purchase internationally, especially if." And
Russia's been in this disinformation business long before we got in. I think we're at it longer. The difference, in fact, I go into the book, there's an operation Neptune, which I don't want to use up your time with one operation. But there are examples, and I talk through sort of this information effort that they have. The difference today is when I was in, you'd have to pay $50 to 10 guys to go out and put signs up, down with the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. But today, you can sit in your studio and I can sit in my home and you can send out, tweets and messages and stir up 50,000 people that show up in some place, even on a lark. Let's all go out and carry coconuts in our left arm and you'll get 50,000 people showing up. So the ability to take this information, in fact, when you look at the 2016 election, there were in several hundred Facebook pages and Twitter pages and trolling. And, I think it reached something like 26 million people who, one way or the other, they kept passing the information, false information. It wasn't just R&D, but they're getting smarter. They're getting better and smarter. And there's a pernicious dimension to this. If you start screwing around in the United States, there's a lot of special interest groups that you can stir up on any day of the week. And that's volatile in our environment. So I think this is a much more serious threat than it's accorded.
One of the things that was a key talking point during the election, and we're not going to get political, but just I want to bring this up, was that Donald Trump wasn't able to do anything about Russian bounties on intelligence collectors. I would submit, just from my own personal experience, and I know that's different. DOD is different than CIA, but we're akin. We're in the same family. But having your name on someone else's intelligence report is a sign of achievement. It means you're communicating with the enemy in my case. Like, I matter on the battlefield. If they don't know who I am because I'm so surreptitious about it, in my case, because I'm doing very upfront, hard, fast collection, then I'm not doing my job. And it's not really a presidential thing from my point of view. Like, Donald Trump calls Putin and says, "Hey, do you have bounties on my guys?" He's going to go, "No." And then Donald Trump's going to go, "Okay." And then they're going to move on. And it's just like Joe Biden. I mean, we had that same thing when Obama was president, and the same thing. And you keep going back and back and back. There's always been, we put bounties on the people that we want eliminated. I promise, if someone gave intel on Soleimani before he got smoked, that person got paid. That's a bounty. So what are your thoughts? I mean, help us understand. I mean, you've done this from a different point of view. You've done this from the CIA side. You've done it for a long time and understand it. But talk a little bit about this bounty process and this bounty thing, because I need to hear it from folks that know.
One of the things that I think is really important to understand, you got to the very beginning of our discussion, what is intelligence? Why do we need it? Well, the reason you need it is, who put that bounty on? Why? What were the circumstances? Were they traveling somewhere? How serious was it? Was it really targeted? So it's not enough just to say there was a bounty. You got to know how that came about. So my point is, and this, we went through this 2016 election. The Mueller report was very thorough in terms of all the things they find about. But what was missing was, did they do it or didn't they do it from a Russian source? In other words, where was the sourcing that told you who decided what to do, what, and why? And it may exist, but my own view on that is, if it exists, it would have leaked. Somebody would have found merit in it. So my concern, or what I really want to say, is we want to make sure we're not underinvested in the human collection of intelligence, because some of these issues can only be answered by people that are in, and it's not going to be in, you can mash down as much information with big data. Some of this stuff, you're just not going to get there. I'm grateful as an intelligence person looking that we have that data, but you very well. Now, one of our problems, and it's an understandable one, is that on 9/11, we decided we were going to make our number one priority terrorism. We were going to go into Iraq and Afghanistan, but that was not cost-free. We went from 10% of the budget on Russian operations, 70% to 10% on Russia in defense and security. So when I wrote the first book, Good Hunting, I talked in the last chapter, I don't get things right all the time. My wife will tell you hardly ever, but when we looked at what was the future, my basic prediction was terrorism is going to wane. That doesn't mean it's going to go away.
Right.
It gets reshaped. Tomorrow you can have a terrible incident because it comes off of a small base. But what I did see, and I think this is very true today, we were going to live in a world of nationalism, populism and nationalism mixed together. We're going to have strong adversaries, strong populist leaders. And if you look today, Putin is a nationalist. He's not a communist. There is no meaningful communist party in Russia. He's not a communist. She is a real communist. You need to factor that in. But he's a strong man, right? Iran, strong leadership. These are tough people. So we need to look at what our target package is. And I want to come back to it again. In order to deal in that world, we need to have had the sources. And if we want to really know what's going on inside the United States and what are the Russians doing, this is when you need a spy. By whatever name one calls them, you need a source.
Yeah, right. And just in general, this is for the audience. Oftentimes, whatever national office handles spying in general, it's called the most benign thing. You really don't know what they do. Like the Office of Special Affairs or whatever. It'll be something.
Be careful. Every time you see that, you want to look. You want to open the door. Make sure you know what's behind it. Open it slowly, though.
Yeah, for sure.
Throw your hat in.
You're talking about all of this foreign influence, and I've had a guy named Robert Hunter on. Maybe you guys have crossed paths before. He's been in administration since the Johnson administration at the diplomatic level, on the diplomatic side, and intel and diplomacy, intel and foreign affairs go hand in hand. Now, what I do doesn't really influence much, foreign affairs, because I'm so close to the ground. My day-to-day things. Unless I find something miraculous, it's just not going to do things. But that's not true for CIA and other agencies. I would imagine DOE has some pretty heavy foreign influence too. But talk about that connection, and then how does that go back to our main adversaries, Russia and China? Because we're talking about these budgets, right? And you don't just get to add more to the budget all the time. We have a finite amount of money and allowance that we can do, and it takes time to build somebody's capacity to go do something. So.
Those are good points. One is money, right? You can't just keep adding. You're right. But as threats change, you need to change with them. Now, the second point you're making is just because you have one set of skills doesn't mean it's applicable to the other set of skills. So after you fight wars for 10 years and do heavy tactical collection, and no, now I want national level strategic intelligence about plans and intentions at the national. So wait a minute, I've got a guy who's jumped out of 16 helicopters with no clothes on and chased the natives away.
Right.
Well, now I need someone sitting in the back room analyzing this problem, and I need to find out one source. It's a different skill set, right? Yeah. And then you have to mix it up. You're not wearing, a flak jacket. You were saying before, you have a diplomat at a cocktail party trying to identify someone that you warm up to. So this transition. It's you just don't say, well, let's tell you now we're going to shift focus on Russia. We're going to go from 10 to 70%. Well, good luck. Get the money. They are increasing it, by the way. But there's also skills and that are built up over years and experience. If you're doing tactical things, you're going to look at problems tactically. So we're in transition in this regard. But everybody's in transition on cyber. If you one can figure out how to manage that in the intelligence world, you have done the world and our country a great service. So far, there are no rules.
Yeah. Well, and then let's go back to that person that creates disinformation. That person can make high six figures sitting in a room just creating things. I mean, that's a hard person to discover. Sure, we can use some counter cyber things to pinpoint their location, and then what? Knock down the door and put them in jail for what? For making memes? It's not as simple as we want it to be. And the other thing is, and I try to get this across to people, but it's hard to understand. And I'm not making a political thing here. It's just that the recent two instances, this is happening all over the place. But when Dianne Feinstein has a Chinese spy as her chief of staff on the West Coast, that's a major problem. When we have members of Congress, I'll just say honeypotting with Chinese operatives, and China has spies everywhere. I mean, they can do whatever they want. They're a lot more unified in their approach than we are. But and it's your third chapter. Intelligence is relentless. We're going to spend money constantly probing and seeking and just churning through things. And this is why you want low-level guys like me, because we can churn and I can find something it never goes the other way. It never comes down. But hey, Pete, we found you a great source, right? It always goes up, which is cool. But that churn, we don't stop. Nobody stops. We're always looking. So we have to always be looking for the people that are looking and looking for the people that are looking for us. It's
I think that's a good rendition of the offensive side. But I think everyone needs to realize they're not making that. They're not having that debate. They decided they're coming at us, right? So they're going full bore, and we need to recognize that it's going to be a very, very difficult 10 years, 15 years where we sort out the relationships with Russia and China, Iran, North Korea. I mean, these are the big items that are on the plate for the national security arena. And as I said, people understand technology. It's constantly changing, so you got to stay up with it.
Right. Yeah.
Human intelligence. The other thing is, I got to tell you, you know this very well. Human intelligence is a very low cost item. How much are you going to pay somebody? I'm not going to put a number out, or people knocking on my door. How can I get a payroll? Well, you match up one technical device, you could probably buy 55, 100, a multiple of 100 human sources. So it's not a money intensive business, and more money, tons of money, doesn't get you there. So you need money, you certainly do, but you need the emphasis there that you're in that space and people recognize it. The other one's easier. I'm not diminishing technology, but it's easier to handle conceptually than and budgetary. When you go to a committee, people are only interested. Well, how much money is going to go to my directorate, and particularly in the defense area that you're in. People would rather deploy technology than invest in human intelligence. At least my experience.
Yeah, but and you're right. The cost of an invisible jet would fund a lot of human people, and I would submit that
it would fund the world's human. You added up everybody's salary that's working in human. I mean, spies.
Yeah,
we get the one wing.
Yeah, so true. But the thing about that, though, is with that comes the realization that if someone chooses internally or externally, and they go, hey, Pete, hey, Jack, we got $5 million budgets for you. If you can just go find us 45,000 votes that will flip this election in the other direction. That's completely doable. I don't need $5 million to do that. And it's like
one thing if our own people are doing it, then that's what the FBI is meant to take care of. But if it's a foreign government, now you're playing with dynamite. I mean, it's got to be dealt with. I mean, you just can't again, we have our own rules in the United States, but one of the points you were making earlier is, you can be anywhere in the world and hassle this country. You don't have to be in the United States in the cyber world to wreak havoc. Disinformation, you don't have to go out in the field and do anything.
Yeah.
You can pump this stuff out, so no one's going to come and knock on your door. You're working on behalf of the state in these foreign governments. They have factories made of people collecting information. So it's free territory. There's a lot of this is political will to do it, will to stop it. And right now, there's clearly a will to do it. The book's out. And this is not partisan either. One of the things that your exposure with the agency and intelligence world in general, in all the 30 years I was in there, I couldn't tell you anyone's political orientation. Maybe a couple of people because we go out and drink, or our families and something would get there. But it's unprofessional to bring political views into the workplace, and particularly intelligence business, because it's going to tilt your judgment. This is going to be helpful, not helpful. So it's very hard. The point is, it has to be a nonpartisan, devoid of that. In fact, there's a quote often cited as you enter the CIA from the Bible, and that is, you know the truth, it will set you free. Yeah. That is really the mantra. Objectivity, nonpartisan. So when I talk about the things I'm talking about, it's not to try and persuade someone to go left or right. You can do that on your own. Mine is to bring sort of the facts in of what's happening in this world. And I guess the beginning of this point was, when I complain about how things were done and money moved, not moved, that's woe to both parties. And it's even woe to all of us armchair people. Where were you? Why didn't you speak up louder? Well, I have screamed at a pretty high level, but that doesn't mean people weren't listening. But they can't keep me quiet so far. As long as we have a democracy, I'm in good shape. Oh, go on your show. I mean, my goodness. Yeah. Well,
we talk quite a bit about all of these things because it is important to at least have the running dialogue, even if no one's listening. People are listening. People are being educated. We have Brad Johnson on all the time. And granted, Brad leans pretty hard to the right, but what he wants is an intelligence agency that it just does its job and isn't politicized. And he would submit, and I agree, is that there's too much politicization in our FBI, our CIA. I mean, look, it's hard to take the FBI seriously as an organization when James Comey says that Secretary of State Clinton has TSSCI several times on her home server, and that's not you and I would be in jail. We would have multiple $10,000 fines, all of it, right? And we can justify it, but you and I both know TSSCI can't leave a skiff. It certainly can't go to your home computer. Is she the only one that's done this?
I walked out of the building. I didn't take a single note. In fact, I have a business, a private sector intelligence business.
Mhm.
People think, well, he left with his agents. You can't leave with your agents. It's certainly unprofessional, very likely illegal. Now, most of the world, intelligence world, people leave and take their assets and continue working.
Right.
You just don't, once you walk out the door of CIA, you don't walk back in. I mean, you have to have a particular reason invited back in.
Yeah.
And you can phone, you just can't. So that's a good thing. But I was just thinking to myself, reminiscing, the General MacArthur. I was a young kid, who watched congressional hearings. I never. So I saw too much of that when I got older. But General MacArthur, when he was fired by Truman, he gave a joint speech before a joint session of Congress, and it's a touching comment. When you're a certain age, old soldiers never die; they fade away. Right? MacArthur is, a special way of talking, and I would say, old spies never die unless they have a pen or a radio. So, in other words, I could leave, and when I left, I kept the secrets for sure. I continue to keep the secrets. Anything I've written goes by the agency. They don't really stop you from saying your political opinions, but you can't do sources and methods.
Right.
But it is important, at least in some people's mind and mine, a certain sense of obligation to keep talking about the business and to critique it where it's appropriate and support it whenever it's in trouble, and it needs to be, needs to have spokesmen behind it. I believe in it as much today as the day I walked in the door, and you're in it, so you obviously have come to those same terms. But there is power in no sense sitting in the local bar complaining about the national government. Get active in politics, local government, or pick up a pen and start writing. See if you can get in the local paper or whatever.
One of the things that I like to do with the show too is to reveal nothing classified, right? But to reveal what it is to do this job and just how crazy dangerous it is. Because what we think of, if anybody's going to talk about espionage in any kind of detailed way, especially human intelligence, they're going to quickly lose the ability to talk with clarity before they start getting fanciful and talk about people that are, not what we do. I mean, what we do is already hard. And then if you're coming up and you want to do this kind of work, how on earth do you develop? I don't know anything about specific CIA techniques, but the Army is pretty terrible at training you. They like here, their thought is just go out and go do it. Let's get you educated, understand the Army culture, and push you out so that you can go learn on the job.
I think the Army does a terrific job training people in a general way. In other words, I don't know anyone who brings in educated discipline. It's an incredible thing. And it's generals, not all of them have I agreed with, but the top-notch people really have been broadly exposed to this world and very well. So I'm pretty high on it. Then when you get into the subsets, and then because of what you queued up earlier, human intelligence is a little idiosyncratic, so therefore it's tougher to think about how you train that way. But on the risk side, I told you on one side, you have your mantra, what it is that you're supposed to do. The other side now has over 140 stars. When I first joined, there was probably about 60, if I recall.
Right.
So, and, I've known a number of the people, but two of them are friends. One was assassinated in cold blood, and the other was blown up.
Yeah.
So, and I know of others that are walking but were blown up. So the risks are huge. And when I was actually the deputy director of operations, there was one star that we gave a young lady a flag because she went through school not realizing that her father had died in the Bay of Pigs, and this mysterious foundation was funding her until she was an adult. But she never knew what happened to her father. But in the Bay of Pigs, his plane went down, and he was captured alive, but he was shot. Shot at close range. In other words, he was assassinated. So those stars tell there were two people that I didn't know personally, but I was there the day they shot a machine gun or an AK-47. Two of our people were killed at the front door of the CIA. So, one of my best friends was, blown up at one of the embassies, and I mean, he's spent a year in rehab, but he's back. One of my first supervisors was blind. He was standing by a window in the Vietnam embassy when a bomb went off. And the glass, now today the windows are totally different. Back in the relatively innocent period, he was blinded by the glass. So, yeah, it's a really dangerous business. Not every day, by any means. I mean, one of the fun things I do is, my life isn't like James Bond. I had my wife on a show, and that was great because you talk about, they wanted to ask me whether I was De Niro and interrogated people when they come in to take my kids. I mean, James Bond doesn't have any kids, right? And so, you're married, you have to write reports, you got to do accounting, you got to go to training, right?
Yeah.
So it's not, but there are moments. And when you're on the battlefield in the military, you know those moments well. And when you're carrying out a clandestine mission, let's say we're breaking into a hostile building, right? Because we want to grab something that's in there. The danger runs inside. 2 people were killed at the corner of my house. There was a bomb thrown at the house next to me. They missed that guy, but it ended in the back of my house and blew the plaster off. Now, that's not every day. I'm taking that over 30 years.
Right.
But
right.
It is a risk. And this, I don't know, we're running out of time, but on the, what do you need to get in the agency, and what do you need to get into your line of work and the military? You have to sense a mission. If you're just trying to see the world, you're not going to be a good soldier. You're not going to be a good spy or a spy master. It really starts with, I want to serve my country. I believe in its mission. And I'll tell you, when a young person, I want to join the CIA, one of the first things I'm looking for is why. Why are you joining it? And if you don't have that, you're not going to make it. You're going to maybe put 5-6 years and you'll be gone, and you'll have wasted your time and the government's time. So that sense of mission and sacrifice, there's no military person to understand the word sacrifice. And there's nobody in the CIA that doesn't sacrifice, because to some degree you're sacrificing. Even the fact that I can't tell my wife and children what I was doing is you're sacrificing the personal interaction with your wife. You come home and say, well, what did you do today? Well, I can't tell you what I did today. You tell me what you did. You do that for 25 years, it gets a little old. And I've been doing it a lot longer than that. So there are sacrifices that people make, and you need to realize that we want to make that sacrifice. I have no regrets. This is not a whining situation here. I consider myself blessed. A miracle that I got in. Let me get that out of the way. Somehow their vetting system didn't work so hot, but I'm blessed. I felt really good about having been in there. It's not meant for everybody. Not everybody should go out and join the CIA. You need to make sure you study and understand what the CIA is about and see if you fit. And do you fit as an analyst is one thing. Do you fit as an operator?
I love what you're saying that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. We all want to be the person that goes out and gets the intelligence, but we're not all built for that. And you can think that you are. It's like thinking you're not going to be a coward in a firefight. You don't know. And it could be any firefight, anytime you might act cowardly. So it's not an easy job to do, to think on your feet all the time, to be exposed to danger all the time, to not expose other people to danger. I mean, there's no doubt, Jack, that by my collecting in the field, I got Iraqis, innocent Iraqis killed, because you can't do it as long as I did and walk away without any blood on your hands. I didn't kill them myself, but that didn't mean that I didn't slip up some kind of security measure or, needlessly expose them. You just can't you can't account for all the occasions in combat. It's just too dangerous. And so you have to have that on your conscience and be able to deal with it without ruining your marriage and, drinking to death and all these other things. It's not easy work. And you're right. It's not for everybody.
But you're touching on a point. I want to finish on because I have to move on if you don't mind, Pete. But, there is you said conscience, right? So when you get into the line of work, you decide to go to Wall Street, that's one side of conscience, right? But you have to think about the ambiguities of intelligence And how do you deal with that? And I go into both books on the covert action. What are the rules of engagement? And this is in the Defense Department, and when you go to war, and when you go into covert action to try and disrupt and throw off an enemy. And you have to have a set of principles. And what I found in the thinking parts of both CIA and the Defense Department is you need to be thinking about the integrity of what you're doing. And what are your obligations in it? And I found, pound for pound, inside the CIA, and I think as part of the vetting process, we might be wild, crazy people on the outside, but inside, lying, manipulation, disinformation, you're dead. You're done in the business. You're totally done. I can count on exaggerating the number and say 5 people, maybe in my entire 30 years, lied to me. A lot of them didn't tell me the whole story, but that's different. So there's a rigid understanding of principle. So going into it, you have to have the sense of mission, but you also have to feel comfortable with its values, which I hope are American values, and I have found them to be such. But the use of force, action, not everybody's comfortable with it. And if you're not, don't feel bad. But if you're not, you join CIA, that may be a problem for you. If you go into the military, it could be a problem. So with your indulgence, Pete, I think this has been a fun discussion for me. A lot of really good concept. I hope your audience found it as worthwhile. And again, I thank you. I hope people read SPYMASTER'S PRISM, right? This is check full of these pearls of wisdom, and like where you learn about all the things I screwed up. That's also a benefit. It's in the footnotes in the back. You don't get it right in all the text. You have to dig deep to find them, but they're there. Trust me.
Anybody who's done this kind of work long enough has footnotes full of their mistakes. That's how we all learn. Everybody, for sure, get the SPYMASTER'S Prism on Amazon. There's a link. It'll be in the show notes. If you're listening on the podcast side, it'll be in there too. 100% certification from me. I've got the book. I'm loving going through it. You guys, if you want to understand this stuff, you want to understand Russia, you have to read this because Jack is a master at this.